Magic systems are a huge part of fantasy. It's so much fun to just explore this brand new world with completely different mechanics and physics and just sciences than we do in the real world. So today I thought we would look at my top 10 magic systems in fantasy. Now this was such a hard list to make and I've probably forgotten some. So please let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite magic system of all time? There is one answer that seems to be super common and it is on my list, but we'll get there when we get there. First up, the book that made me want to make this video is a new release that I'm currently reading, The Tainted Cup. And oh boy, am I having an absolute blast with this book. It's so much fun. But one part in particular that I really like is the magic system. Now, the magic system in Tainted Cup is really unique. It's got a lot of sort of genetic modifications, and it ties so well to the setting and the plot. That's one thing that I think is underrated with magic systems when we discuss them. We often talk about what's really cool about them, but often what makes them really cool is how it ties into the characters, the story, or the world. And in this case, it ties so well into the world and the plot in particular. And we follow the main character, who is an engraver, which means he can engrave things into his mind with a perfect memory. So this is all sort of genetic manipulation, and for an engraver in particular, they had to go through a procedure to make this possible. So it's not just you're born with it or you're not, this is something that has to happen to you. But an engraver carries about lots of different jars and glass vials for them to sniff, and then they are able to remember everything that's happening around them and tie it to that smell. So later on, they open the jar, re-smell it, and they'll be able to remember everything, which is such a cool idea because it's tied in real science. We often hear about how, certain songs can get you in certain moods. A lot of you people use the same playlist for studying because as soon as it starts playing, your brain starts thinking, okay, this is the studying music. So there's a lot of scientific base to this as well. This does also put some limitations on the magic. It means that if he loses vials, does that mean he forgets what he has engraved? Or is it just harder to remember? But this is only one class. There are lots of different genetic modifications that people can go through. So there are these people called cracklers. If I remember right, I'm pretty sure they're called cracklers. They're basically just souped up, super jacked people who can have massive muscles and are able to cleave people in half with this new strength that they have gained. But the downside is that they have a shorter lifespan just because their body goes through so much stress from handling all this muscle. And often they have to have new bones implanted into their body to handle all this new muscle. As well as this, there are people who are modified to be able to make very fast calculations. There are individuals that are very good at reading and writing, being like lots of different languages. And it's just this idea of being able to medically implant different abilities into individuals. But I really like how Robert Jackson Bennett sort of tempered all these abilities with certain limitations, such as the main detective in this, Anna, who is an amazing character. She's so quirky. I love her. She's great. I'm not 100% sure what her abilities are completely yet. However, she is very smart and able to pick through lots of information very quickly and make connections. However, she now needs to walk about blindfolded so she doesn't take in too much information and just overwhelm her. So she often stays in her room and then sends her engraver out to collect sort of information about these crime scenes. I probably talked way too long about this one magic system, but it's so cool. I'm having a blast with this book. So I've not even finished it, and this has already become one of my favorite magic systems. It's so cool. Highly recommend. Next on up, we have Furies of Calderon by Jim Butcher. Now this one, I didn't love the book, but one of the absolute highlights for me was the magic system. So in this world, there are these creatures called Furies, and they are tied to different elements. So you can get fire Furies, you can get water Furies, I think you can get metal and wood Furies as well. And an individual can then bond to one of these Furies, and then they can sort of ask for help and work with this Fury. So it's a lot like bending in Avatar: The Last Airbender, but slightly different because it is tied to your connection with your Fury. However, on top of this, you do get additional abilities such as water bonded Fury people I can't remember if there's a name or not, but the water people, they're very empathetic and can feel other people's emotions. So they can walk into a room and some of them can get very overwhelmed if it's a very tense situation or a very stressed situation, which plays a huge part in this story. This book was inspired by Pokemon, so that kind of gives you a bit of an idea behind how these Furies work. It's a bit like Spren in Stormlight Archive in the way that you pair with one of these Furies and you can use the abilities through them. But that means you can also be cut off from them. I just really love when they add animal companions in with the magic as well. So much fun. Next on up, we have the One Power and the Wheel of Time. Also, just as a side note, I know New Spring should technically be on the other side because it's a prequel, but the end of the design is on the spine, so it doesn't make sense to put it on the other side because the design won't all flow across the spine. So just a side note, because I've seen a couple comments about that, that's why. But the One Power is such a cool magic system, and one of the reasons why I really like it is just kind of the original premise and setup of it. Is this idea of having a male and female side of the magic, a bit like a yin and yang type thing, and females can still pull from the magic no problem, but the male side of the magic system has been tainted by the Dark One. So if any male starts pulling from the magic, they start to go insane. And this is what we call a storytelling promise. If you set up something with that sort of setup, you know at some point we have to see someone go insane with the magic. So everybody, just by the setup, is already concerned for the main character who can pull from the magic, who's a male. And even with the very famous prologue Dragon Mount, we get to see one person in particular who has murdered his entire family and everyone around because of the magic system. So it already sets up the implications and sort of limitations of the male side of the magic. So to have a storytelling promise tied to the magic system is such a unique way to kind of show you where this story is going, especially foreshadowing it and showing it in the prologue. Next one up, we have Flames of Mira from the Rift War saga. And this is a chemical-based magic system. So in this world, people can be tied to certain chemicals. And then if they have an affinity to that chemical, then they can then pull on that magic. I know earlier I was talking about how cool it is to sort of learn a new mechanics of the world and learn about new sciences. However, what's really interesting is when you base it on true science, and it just already sets this solid base and foundation that you already understand, in the way that the people in the book are then be able to manipulate that and make it very different from our world just adds a layer of possibility and depth. Also, having it as sort of wide as being able to control chemicals, it does open the door to so many possibilities. As you can see in the cover, the main character, Ig, is able to lift up magma and lava and use it as a sort of gauntlet, which is just cool. Again, going back, very much in the rule of cool. And of course, I am keeping this spoiler free. However, the way that the magic system then ties into the plot as well and how they go about being able to control these chemicals is such an interesting part of the world and the story, and a lot of implications for the magic itself. Next on up, we have the King Killer Chronicles, starting with the Name of the Wind. Now, this technically has several magic systems in it. That's part of the magic of this series, is it does have a softer magic system, being naming itself, and also a harder magic system, which is called sympathy. And just to define some terms, a soft magic system is something that's a lot more loosey-goosey, doesn't really have set rules. It's just sort of, there's magic and it does stuff. So think Lord of the Rings with Gandalf. We're not really 100% sure of all he is able to do. Tolkien experts may correct me on that. However, most people, when they read it, are just sort of, it's a very loose magic system that doesn't have a lot of set definitions of what it can do. Whereas a hard magic system is something that you'll find a lot in Brandon Sanderson's work, where there's set rules and set requirements to be able to do certain things. It's all very scientific almost. So in this, we have the naming, which is probably my favorite magic system of the two. I do like having the combination of both. Bible C naming is super cool, whereas you're able to find the name of something and then you have control over it. And it's this very loose soft magic system concept, which does give it this sort of ancient magic sort of feel, where we're not really sure how it works or if Kavoth will be able to use it. Whereas Sympathy is a lot more mechanical and sort of rune-based, where they have different etchings and they can give abilities to different items, and he sort of becomes this sort of almost engineer mechanic type person, being able to use the Sympathy magic and create different items. But that's also another point I wanted to make, is that you don't need to have just one magic system. You can have more than one, and they can be completely different and unrelated. Unlike Sanderson, who pretty much ties all his magic systems together, which is insane, even between series. They're technically all using the same sort of mechanics. So we might as well talk about the Sando next. It would be no surprise that Mistborn is on this list. I mean, if you watch any magic system video here on YouTube, pretty much all of them will have Mistborn on it in particular, because it is such a interesting magic system, and it sort of has this great setup and tie-in with the plot. So a very simple premise is that this is a heist trilogy. I guess the first book is more of a heist book. And Sanderson's sort of idea for creating this magic system and this world was that what if we had different people with different abilities in one team, just sort of being able to do the classic sort of heist setup. So how this works in the books is characters are able to ingest certain metals, and they gain abilities depending on the metal that they ingest. Most people can only have the affinity to use one type of metal. However, there are very rare cases where you get Mistborns who are able to ingest all of them and access all of the different magic. And it's been a while since I've read this, and I've been reading Era 2, which is a follow-up to the magic system hundreds of years later, and the way that the magic system improves and changes with time and how technology affects magic is a huge part of what makes the Mistborn magic system so interesting, is the way that he has managed to develop it with the societies that the magic system is in. Okay, yeah, so just for some examples, if you ingest iron, you can pull on nearby metal, so make it come to you. So you can steal some weapons from some other people's hands, or you can even pull your whole body towards it. However, there is a sort of push and pull system where if you do pull it and it's lighter than you, it will just fly towards you. But if it's huge and really heavy and you pull on it, you go towards it. If you ingest tin, you can enhance your senses. If you ingest pewter, you can enhance your physical abilities. If you ingest brass, you can soothe people's emotions around you, or zinc, who can riot people's emotions and get them really riled up. So often you'll find people doing that in a room to get a certain effect from a crowd. And these mistings all have titles: lurchers, coinshot, tin eye. So it does make it almost like a class system with the magic and how they perfectly fit into this heist crew. Next on up might be a bit of a weird choice. You might go, Andrew, really? Of all the fantasy books, this is the one that you're choosing? Yes, and let me tell you why. The next book on this list is Harry Potter. And the reason for that is I love having wands and having this sort of device for magic, but also being tied to the ability of the individual, but they can't do it without the wand. It makes so many interesting narrative possibilities, and I would have included other books that have similar setups, but I can't think of any. I can only really think about Harry Potter as sort of the series that uses wands, so I would be amiss not to include it. But the two reasons I really like the Harry Potter magic system, first off, is the wands. So it's very difficult to use other wizards' wands. It's very difficult. You can't cast spells if you don't have your wand. So in battles, if someone knocks a wand from your hand, you're pretty much disarmed and you've lost. If you're facing someone who wants to kill you, you're dead. So having that creates a lot of different possibilities for action scenes and creating these very tense moments when they can't get access to their wand. When you have a magic system that's quite soft like Harry Potter, it's very difficult to then temper the abilities of the characters to make these scenes very tense, particularly versus the antagonist. So having something like a conduit of the magic like a wand just works so well. The second thing I really like is that it is a soft magic system, but it's the way she handles that. With soft magic systems, it's very frustrating if you come across one that just manages to pull the hero out at the last minute. This sort of deus ex machina with the magic is a lot more common with soft magic systems. However, this is grounded with Harry Potter with the fact that they need to know the spell. So Harry Potter can't just suddenly become this super powerful wizard at the final battle of the first book because friendship, the power of friendship powers him up. He needs to have learned that spell throughout the book. And yes, it can get stronger because of the tenseness of the final battle, sure, but still tempered by the fact that he does need to know that spell. Next on up, we have the War Eternal series by Rob J. Hayes. Now, this magic system is all around sources, and sources are these small gems that a sorcerer has to ingest, and then they have the ability to control that magic that's tied to that source. However, not all individuals can use sources, and not all individuals can use all sources. So much like Mistborn, people have to have an affinity to the source to be able to control the magic. And some of these abilities can be pulling creatures through from the other world, which is this sort of demon realm full of these nightmare creatures that the sorcerers can pull from and summon these demons to fight for them. So once you ingest a source, you can only keep it in your stomach for so long before bringing it up, or you can die from source poisoning. So that's two great limitations. Hard magic system, lots of different possibilities with these sources. So there are 20 of these different sources, and it is rare for a sorcerer to be attuned to more than 2. So usually they can only use one of the magics, and sometimes 2. But it's rare that you can use more than that. Some of the examples of the different sources are hydromancy, the manipulation of water, pyromancy, the manipulation of temperature, geomancy, the manipulation of stone, onomancy, manipulation of time, portomancy, the magic of space, necromancy, the magic of death, biomancy, the magic of life, which is tied to healing. Next on up, we have the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. Now, this also has 2 magic systems in it, one called the Skill and one called the Wit. Both are pretty soft magic systems, but they are pretty limited in what they can do. You're not going to be throwing fireballs at people with either of them. So we'll start with the Skill. The Skill is this sort of almost telecommunication type magic system where one can sort of connect with others and go inside their head. This is mainly used to pass on messages, so you can have characters who can sort of interact with one another despite the fact that they are across the country from each other, which again makes for very interesting dynamics. It's incredibly draining on the individuals who use the skill, and people can get really worn down. Again, avoiding specifics just to keep this completely spoiler free, but you can really see how it does break down some of the characters that have to use it to keep the society going. And that's partly because there aren't very many who have the skill. So that means if you do want to pass messages across the kingdom, or the duchess in this situation, there's only a couple people who can really do that. Secondly, we have the Wit, which is the one I find probably more interesting. It is to do with bonding with animals. The person who looks after him, his guardian, tells him how bad it is and how it's very dark, evil magic and they shouldn't do it. So right from the start of the series, we are told that this is a magic that shouldn't be touched. This is one that should be completely avoided. And for a while, we are not really given much more information than that, but we are told that you can become more of an animal by bonding with an animal as your minds meld together through this bond. And again, much like the Wheel of Time magic system, this does set up a storytelling promise. There's no way you're going to set something up like that and not then explore it. So you know at some point in the trilogy, Fitz will probably bond to an animal and will find it very difficult to break that bond, or probably become more animalistic in some way. But the one thing about these 2 magic systems is there isn't a whole lot of rule of cool. It's not flashy and particularly, wow, look at that sort of for an action sequence. However, it perfectly fits in with the characters and the world. Again, this integration of all of the elements of the story is really what brings up this magic system in my ratings, particularly with Fitz's lack of control of the skill how he creates these massive walls and he doesn't let anyone enter his mind, or they're completely down and he has no control and just lets everybody in, and he lets all his thoughts kind of flash out to all the other people who have the skill. And how that perfectly ties to his character and his arc throughout the story, it works so well as a sort of visual representation of Fitz as a character. And last but most certainly not least, we have the Sword of Kaigen. Now this is an elemental style magic system, very akin to Avatar: The Last Airbender. It has people who are able to sort of bend the elements of water and ice and wind and fire. What really got me with this magic system was the utilization of such a simple concept. Even in this video alone, we've talked a lot about sort of elemental type bending, a lot like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but the creative uses that it has in sort of Kaigen was the one thing that really surprised me. We follow the Matsuda family, which is this really old family who are known for being very strong, and they have this ability called the Whispering Blade. And it's when a Matsuda can create a sword completely from ice, but really, really strong sword that can cut through almost anything. As well as this, they can do the sort of more standard firing ice spears, they can freeze people's feet, they can melt the snow from underneath their feet so they can walk and not slip. There's so many just small details that are tied to the world and just the goings about of these people. They utilize the magic system in just sort of everyday life, which is something that you don't get to see a lot in other fantasy books. A lot of the time it's just used in battle application. However, if you have a magic in that world, yeah, you're going to use it to wash your clothes and all these sort of simple day-to-day things if you have the ability to do that. And I really want to talk about the ice dragon thing, but I don't want to because it's so cool to come across it while you're reading it. So I'm not going to spoil it. But it's not an ice dragon, it's not a real dragon, but it's something that they can do with the magic. And it's so cool. It's such a cool concept, and I'm not going to spoil it because it's really fun to come across just reading it. So I highly recommend reading Sword of Kaigen. It's just a fantastic book, and the magic in it. And as you can see, there's a lot of connections between what I like in fantasy magic systems, when it's able to tie to the character development and the world and just sort of used in everyday life, but also when it has sort of like a wow and interesting factor too. There's so much that goes into a good magic system. So let me know in the comments below, what are some of your favorite magic systems? Also, I'm really proud of the magic system in my Shadowbinders trilogy, with Harbinger of Justice being the first book. It's got shadow magic and it's got blood magic, and I'm really proud of it, but I thought it'd be really arrogant to include it in the video. But just letting you know, I'm a fan. Otherwise I wouldn't have written it. So if you're looking for some more magic systems to check out, shadow and blood magic, whereas the shadow magic is probably a wee bit more softer, whereas the blood magic is a lot harder, but you learn more about it in the sequel, more so than in the first book. That's it, and thank you very much for watching. Next on up, we have the wheel. Usually I catch that.